All right, and in the studio here we have two guests with us. We have Zhang Yongpeng, a senior research fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies under the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics, University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us at this hour. So we have the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue underway there, and then we were looking at the family photos just now that's been taken. Now, the theme for this dialogue is promoting African integration and jointly building a high-level Africa-China community with a shared future. So if you could first talk to us a little bit about what this shared future would look like. Professor Liu, if we could start with you.
Well, shared future shall rest upon the basic notion of mutual respect and mutual benefit. So right now, the Africans have really suffered a great deal along its history from the colonization, and those Suzerains are not really doing their responsibility. Of course, they look at more of the trading partners around the globe and see that China is really coming there with sincerity, with the trustworthiness in terms of the trade and investment, and also in the monetary aid and also the human aid, etc. And so right now, the Africans, they are teaming up to build their free trade area across the continent, and then how they can really work together for the inner trade, and at the same time they can interact with the major trading partners like China. So this is a grand opportunity for both of the China and the entire Africa really to work together. And now that China is really setting up a number of showcases, working very successfully and also gloriously with so many African countries. Now, to upgrade this entire collaboration and to tap into the new frontier like digital technology and green agriculture, and smart management and smart governance, and these are really the areas to further strengthen the ties, and so that only when the entire humankind, only when Africa is really lifted onto the more or less the equal level economically and socially with the rest of the world, and we do not really see the real equity and fairness in the human operation.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there. We've got President Ramaphosa, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa speaking now. Listening.
With President Xi Jinping. This dialogue has been convened to consider the role of China-Africa relations in supporting the goal of regional integration in Africa, as outlined in the African Union's Agenda 2063, promoting the movement of goods, services, people, and capital across Africa is vital for the future growth and prosperity of our beloved continent, Africa. African economic integration promises to open up more opportunities for African producers and consumers. It also promises to lower the costs of trade and to attract large-scale investment into our continent. South Africa and China have just successfully concluded the fourth state visit by President Xi Jinping to South Africa, by which we are truly honored. The state visit afforded us an opportunity to share views and to affirm the importance of the comprehensive strategic partnership that South Africa and the People's Republic of China has. We discussed the deepening of South-South cooperation and issues of mutual interest in international affairs within the multilateral formations of BRICS, the G20, the G77 plus China, and others. We have also just concluded the 15th BRICS Summit, which is reaching conclusion as we speak. A priority of South Africa's chairship of BRICS is to address African developmental challenges, building on an existing partnership to deliver tangible benefits for Africa. All BRICS partners support the AU's Agenda 2063 and are significant investors in our continent. The new development bank, with its African Regional Center in Johannesburg, also continues to mobilize resources for infrastructure development. And under its new leadership, we all heard what their vision is for our continent in terms of supporting infrastructure development. This significant infrastructure investment needed to operationalize the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will unlock the benefits of the continental market and generate mutually beneficial opportunities for both African and BRICS countries. These opportunities relate not only to trade and investment, but also in driving sustainable development and increased standards of living for the people of our continent. In this regard, we thank the Chinese government for expressing its full support to the South African BRICS chairship in fulfilling the African agenda. We need to place China-Africa relations in the context of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, which advances a strategic and cooperative partnership between the continent of Africa and China. There is a need to further strengthen consultation and coordination on FOCAC to enhance implementation and practical cooperation in various fields under the Dakar Action Plan. Future engagement should be aligned with the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063. There should be joint monitoring and evaluation as well. South Africa calls for a review of all FOCAC projects so that we can ascertain the level of implementation. We would welcome technical, financial, and capacity building support for the identified projects. We are in full support of the Belt and Road Initiative that China has been implementing, and this has resulted in the creation of new road, rail, port, and energy investments on the African continent. Investing in infrastructure is essential, and infrastructure investments also foster innovation and productivity, and they lower transaction costs as well. And as we move forward with the decade of Agenda 2063, we must focus on African countries reaching middle income status and empowering African citizens through improved productivity. We need to build more integrated and a more connected Africa. Central to African growth is going to be the African Continental Free Trade Area, and through this we hope to be able to boost economic growth on our continent. It will also lead to industrialization for the African continent, and where we will be able to address underdevelopment, unemployment, women's empowerment, climate change, and energy and youth development as well. As part of deepening China-Africa relations, we should enhance cooperation in the international affairs, as well as within various multilateral institutions. China and Africa should cooperate in calling for the creation of institutional mechanisms that will have the stature, the form, and the global trust to effectively manage matters of global peace and security. Our deliberations this evening will afford us the opportunity to address a number of key developmental challenges that are specific to Africa. Dealing with regional challenges will further enhance our goals and regional integration in support of our continent's integration. This can only be achieved with all our commitment and through the assistance of important development partners like China. I'd like, as I end, to extend a word of gratitude to China, a country that came to the aid of our continent at the greatest time of need, as we were going through the challenges of COVID-19. It was China that stood up and gave assistance to the African continent. I remember very clearly, as I was chair of the African Union, calling President Xi Jinping on the telephone and urging him to assist us with personal protective equipment and later with vaccines, but also much later with debt relief. And in all those occasions, as I spoke to President Xi on the phone on more or less 3 occasions, I found a partner of Africa willing to assist at the time of great need for our continent. So I would say that in China, we have a partner who is able to see the developmental needs of our continent. And in us, President Xi Jinping, you have a partner, many countries on our continent, that you can walk the path of mutual beneficial interests. And we are fully aware that this is not a one-way interest journey. It's a mutual beneficial interest, which we as African countries want to promote, and we are thankful that you also subscribe to that. In this regard, I once again welcome all of you to this important roundtable dialogue and look forward to our engagement. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, Your Excellencies, Heads of State, colleagues, I thank President Ramaphosa for his statement. South Africa has held BRICS summits multiple times, actively reflected the African characters in BRICS cooperation, and played an important role for China and Africa to deepen cooperation within the BRICS framework. China is ready to work with South Africa to make new efforts to strengthen China-Africa cooperation and the cooperation between BRICS and Africa. I now make a statement on behalf of the Chinese side. Your Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, Your Excellencies, colleagues, it is a great pleasure to co-chair with President Ramaphosa the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue. I feel a particular warmth seeing my African friends face to face after 5 years to celebrate our friendship and chart the way forward for our cooperation. I thank my friends for attending the meeting and send sincere greetings to leaders of other African countries who are not with us today. Africa is a fertile land of hope in the 21st century. This is my 10th visit to the continent. Each time, I feel the new development and changes in Africa. As the Organization of African Unity marks its 60th anniversary this year, I wish to convey heartfelt congratulations to you all and to the African people. Over the past 60 years, under the banner of Pan-Africanism, African countries have made big strides on the path of independence, seeking strength through unity and integration. You have demonstrated the strength of Africa in the struggles to uphold multilateralism and the common interests of developing countries. With steady progress under Agenda 2063 of the African Union, the official launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and growing coordination among the sub-regional groups, Africa is becoming an important pole with global influence. In 2013, when I became Chinese president, I was here in Africa for my first foreign visit and announced the principle of sincerity, real results, amity, and good faith for China's Africa policy. Over the past 10 years, China has stayed committed to this principle. Together with our African friends and drawing strength from the spirit of China-Africa friendship and cooperation, we have pressed ahead on the path of solidarity and cooperation, stood for justice amid shifting global dynamics, and looked out for each other in face of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have taken China-Africa relations to new heights and entered the new stage of jointly building a high-level China-Africa community with a shared future. Colleagues, China is marching toward the second centenary goal of building itself into a great modern socialist country in all respects that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful when the People's Republic marks its centenary. We are pursuing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. Africa is moving at an accelerated speed toward the bright prospects envisioned in Agenda 2063 and making all-out efforts to build a new Africa that enjoys peace, unity, prosperity, and strength. China and Africa must work together to create a sound environment for realizing our respective development visions. Let's work together to promote a just and equitable international order. We should carry forward the spirit of sticking together in times of adversity, practice true multilateralism, and unequivocally oppose vestiges of colonialism and hegemonism in all forms. We should firmly support each other in defending core interests, stand strong by the just cause of developing countries, and work for a more just and equitable international order. Let's work together to safeguard a peaceful and secure global environment. Africa is working unremittingly for the goal of silencing the guns. China is ready to work with Africa to implement the new vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. Advocate the resolution of differences and disputes through dialogue and cooperation. Facilitate the political settlement of international and regional hotspot issues, and safeguard world peace and stability. We should uphold harmonious coexistence between man and nature and protect the security of the global eco-environment. Let's work together to build an open and inclusive world economy. What we need is to remove barriers rather than erect walls, open up rather than close off. We should carry out extensive consultation and make joint contribution for shared benefit, reject the winner-take-all approach, and build an open world economy where developing countries are better involved in the international division of labor and share the fruits of economic globalization. We should overcome estrangement between civilizations through exchanges, promote inclusiveness and mutual learning between civilizations, and make new contributions to human progress. Colleagues, there are various paths leading to modernization. The African people have the most say on which path suits Africa best. Advancing modernization through integration is the independent choice made by African countries and people. On this path to modernization, China has all along been a firm supporter and working side by side with Africa. Over the years, China has helped Africa build a large amount of connectivity infrastructure, carried out extensive cooperation with the AU and sub-regional organizations, and assisted the construction of several signature Pan-African projects, including the AU Conference Center and the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Looking ahead, China will work with Africa to enhance the synergy of our development strategies. Through Belt and Road cooperation and the Forum on China-Africa cooperation, and in light of Agenda 2063, China will intensify dialogue and communication with Africa at various levels and support the African agencies for integration, including the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, and the African Union of Broadcasting, among others, in creating cooperation mechanisms with China. China will continue to support Africa in speaking with one voice on international affairs and continuously elevating its international standing. China will work actively at the G20 summit next month to support the AU's full membership in the group. China supports making special arrangements on the UN Security Council reform to meet Africa's aspiration as a priority. China will call on multilateral financial institutions to enhance the say of African countries. To chart the course for our practical cooperation in the next stage and help Africa bring its integration and modernization into a fast track, I wish to make the following 3 proposals. China will launch the Initiative on Supporting Africa's Industrialization. China will better harness its resources for cooperation with Africa and the initiative of businesses to support Africa in growing its manufacturing sector, and realizing industrialization and economic diversification. In implementing the 9 programs under the 4CAC framework, China will channel more resources of assistance, investment, and financing toward programs for industrialization. China will launch the plan for China supporting Africa's agricultural modernization. China will help Africa expand grain plantation, encourage Chinese companies to increase agricultural investment in Africa, enhance cooperation with Africa on seed and other areas of agrotechnology, to support Africa in transforming and upgrading its agricultural sector. China will host the 2nd Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Agriculture in Hainan this November. To help Africa tackle the current food crisis, China will provide additional emergency food assistance to some African countries in need. More importantly, China has confidence that Africa will attain food self-sufficiency through its own efforts. China will launch the Plan for China-Africa Cooperation on Talent Development. China plans to train 500 principals and high-caliber teachers of vocational colleges and 10,000 technical personnel with both Chinese language and vocational skills for Africa every year. China will invite 20,000 government officials and technicians of African countries to participate in workshops and seminars. To support Africa in strengthening education and innovation, we will launch the China-Africa Universities 100 Cooperation Plan and 10 pilot exchange programs of China-Africa partner institutes. Colleagues, the world today is undergoing shifts and turmoil, and changes unseen in a century are unfolding at a faster pace. At this point of history, we all face the tasks of how to address the deficit in development, overcome security challenges, and enhance mutual learning between civilizations. In view of this, I have put forward the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, called for peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit, and advocated building a community with a shared future for mankind. These proposals have received the valuable support of African countries. China and Africa, through our creative explorations for modernization, are giving our answers to the questions of our times and making joint efforts to advance the great endeavors of win-win cooperation, harmonious coexistence, and shared prosperity of civilizations. Next year, China will host the 4CAC meeting, where we shall come together again and draw up new plans for our development. It is a big gathering that both sides are looking forward to. I am confident that China and Africa will carry forward the traditional friendship, enhance solidarity and coordination, and bolster our cooperation across the board. As we join hands to advance modernization, we will deliver a better future for the Chinese and African people, and set a fine example in the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. I thank you. Colleagues, according to our agenda, I will chair session 1 of our dialogue. First, I give the floor to President Azali Assoumani, rotating chairperson of the African Union.
And that's Chinese President Xi Jinping speaking at the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue. And earlier we heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, also co-chairing that dialogue. Professor Liu and Mr. Zhang, we heard a lot, both leaders mentioning the Agenda 2063 there. That's the Africa agenda, the Africa we want. Now, Mr. Zhang, I was reading up on the South African government's official statement before this dialogue and saying what they were looking for, the outcomes from this meeting. And a lot of it was looking for support and commitment from China to help with this agenda. So just shed some light for us on this. In what ways can China help with achieving this agenda?
I think up to now, the FOCAC, the platform, the major platform, and the Better Road Initiative as the added one, has been acting and working so well. And especially from the FOCAC platform, we have the follow-up actions every 3 years. And for the Better Road Initiative, and we have the infrastructure supporting and investment and people-to-people exchanges. Right. And now what for China and Africa to do is how to connect the Better Road Initiative and the Agenda 2063. And this is the priority for China-Africa cooperation. And we have now seen very clearly that the aim or the goal of the 2063 has been largely in accordance with the Better Road Initiative. And so in this case, and together as well as the countries, Pacific African countries' national strategic development plan, right? All of these different level of plans or strategic visions could be connected well, and that's what Chinese government is pushing forward. And so we are together with the financial pools that has been established. For example, the China-Africa Fund and the Better Road, Silk Road, the bank, and the BRICS Bank, Development Bank. All of these financial pools are providing supporters to the development of the 2063. And China's support to this agenda, the African agenda, is crucially important for Africa's industrialization and agricultural modernization, and especially the economic takeoff, right? That is crucially important. And finally, to get the goal of to build a community with shared future, and especially the China-Africa community of shared future. And I think this is would be a great contribution to the new world order and to the building of the democratic international order.
All right, we'll discuss this in a bit more detail later. Let's go first to our reporter who's in Johannesburg. Standing by for us is Zhao Yunfei. Yunfei, so talk to us a bit more about the agenda for this meeting and the expected outcomes.
Well, Jiaoyang, at the dialogue between the leaders of China and African countries, President Xi Jinping has just made the remarks, and during his remarks, he has made 3 proposals on further enhance the relationship and cooperation between China and African nations. The first proposal was an initiative on support Africa's modernization. Second proposal is an initiative on support Africa's agriculture, and also the third one, a plan between China and Africa cooperation on talent development. So modernization, agriculture, talent development, those are the procedures that China has already get started to further enhance the coordination between African countries. In his remarks, the key term that he mentioned a lot of times, which is the modernization, because China has already launched its own path of modernization. And hopefully the African countries will be also able to launch their own ways of modernization. And China says that all countries should have their own ways of development, and all countries should support and each other in its own ways of development. But certainly the Chinese modernization could be a path of development that for other countries could learn from. In the remarks, President Xi also explained the relationship, the 3 layers of relationship between China and South Africa, China and Africa, and China and BRICS members. So basically this BRICS summit right here in Johannesburg is the opportunity for China to celebrate its relationship with all these 3 layers. And during the Ramaphosa speech, he also cherished China's support as well as China's coordination with the South African country. And what's being interesting observation on that is that during President Xi's 4-day state visit in Johannesburg, President Ramaphosa has spent a lot of time with President Xi. On Tuesday, there was a welcome ceremony, which is between just 2 of them. And what is going on right now, which is Thursday, is the dialogue between China and African leaders, and President Xi and President Ramaphosa was co-chairing the event. It's also a very interesting layout. So the dialogue is ongoing. We're expecting to hear that more leaders from more than 10 countries deliver their own thoughts, and that will be another way of dialogue which can promote and further discussions on the cooperation and relationship between the countries who are participating. Back to you.
Thanks so much for the update, Zhao Yunfei in Johannesburg. Professor Liu, so we had our reporter talk about those proposals that President Xi made, and industrialization, we know why that's important, but agriculture, he specifically mentioned investment in this to help Africa attain food self-efficiency. So talk to us a bit about the importance and the significance of this and how China can help.
Well, it is reported by the international organization, particularly FAO, is that there are still over 300 million people who suffer from malnourishment, and most of them are really concentrated on the African continent. So to feed people, their stomach is a very realistic and acute need for not only the African people, but it is the responsibility of the entire human race, particularly for those wealthy countries. And now that the grain supply has been disrupted by the Ukraine crisis, that is now they look up to China, in addition to other international institutions, simply to solve this urgent problem. But to give is one thing, but to help is another. And now China is so much resolved to go for its own the urban development, and in addition of the rural rejuvenation program. So by integrating the urbanization, industrialization, and the rural revitalization, and this is the recipe that the African continent can also emulate. And now another dimension is to go for green agriculture. So agronomics is there to have its own entire supply chain, from the seed development and seed bank management to the plantation, and then to the scientific use of pesticides and fertilizer, and eventually for the processing of the more value-added goods, and eventually, you discover the right type of market on the international front. So this whole thing that China can have not only the experience to share, but also have the skill sets that can really meet their demand. So I think now this is really a very realistic issue, and I hope that the new development bank, particularly after its capitalization, can really hand its more of the financial support for Chinese companies and Chinese scientists to work together on this green agri-economic development.
But this issue, I mean, Africa, we talk about the African continent, but between, amongst all these African countries, they have very different circumstances, right? So how will China go about helping, all African countries help to achieve this level of food sufficiency? Mr. Zhang.
Yes, of course. The national situation of almost every African countries are different. Each have their own particular situation, and for example, the natural conditions and geographical conditions on the land, and the weather conditions, for example. But they have some common features, which are could be largely speaking, the agriculture and plantation should rely on the weather conditions finally, and on the other hand, the quality of the quality of the land are still a little bit different, right? There are also some quite in some countries are quite sharp difference from the others. For example, the red land, right? There are some different crops, right? Need some different conditions of land. So we should say, in this respect, China, we have, as we have just mentioned now, China has the advantages of technology, agricultural technology, and maybe in the capital side, we have also a little bit something like sufficient, right, support, right, tools, approaches to be provided to the African countries, and for example, the machinery facilities, right? These kind of things could offer support to the African countries. Specifically, for different countries, we can send out different agricultural supporting teams. It is just like the example of the medical teams, right? Since we know that since 1960s, we have sent up to now more than 40 African countries, the medical teams. The African, agriculture. Because agriculture sector in Africa is a special something in particular, because if we...
Right, sorry, Mr. Zhang, I will have to cut you off there. We're going to leave this discussion here for now. Thank you so much to both our guests, Zhang Yunpeng and also Liu Baocheng. Thank you both so much for now, and thanks for watching this short edition of The World Today. I'm Jia Yang in Beijing.